Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review is brought to you in part by Rogers Hobby Center in Saginaw, Michigan, where the fun begins. This review covers the Taco Trike. It's an MPC custom show trike kit in 1/25th scale, number 893. Now the kit is not based on a real vehicle, but it emulates the vehicle customizers from that era that created some wild vehicle designs. Now the kit is originally released in '74 and it was called the Edge Chopper. It contains 61 parts molded in white, chrome, clear orange, and clear purple. And it comes with colorful water slide decals and soft vinyl tires. The kit's listed as an intermediate skill kit, although it's pretty simple otherwise, but there can be some tricky parts to assembling it, so it's not for the beginner. Now I'll use an airbrush to paint the body, and I hand brushed all the other parts. Now I used some one-shot tan for the main body. It's code number L117 over it, and I mixed some clear and gold metallic for a little bit of a pearl effect. The other colors will be mentioned in the text. And when you're done, it's 7.5 inches long, 3.25 inches high, and 2 3/4 inches wide. Here are the contents for the kit. You can see it's pretty cleanly molded. All the main body parts are white. And then the colorful glass contributions there at the bottom. Now the tires are special. They're hollow rear Racemaster slick tires, but on the other side there are some red flames, so you get your choice there. And it's got a solid Pirelli bike tire for the front. Now we'll be using mostly liquid cement, but we'll mention other types of adhesives used, and please follow the manufacturer's use guidelines for any of the material that you see or products that you see in the review. Another highlight for this kit are the decals. They're very colorful, and they've got color options that allow you to match just about any base color. So as you can see here, they're just beautiful. Now most of the surfaces are flat, so you probably won't need any setting solution. Just use lots of warm water when putting the decals in place. Construction starts by gluing the two halves of the main body together at the top. You use some solvent glue that will squeeze a little out, and you should be able to just sand that off later without having to put filler in it. But you'll also note that you don't glue the lower part there, this lower section. That needs to stay open a little bit for installation of the motor later on. So aside from the seams that you create when you put the two halves together, you can clean those up to your satisfaction. But there's also a couple of parting lines here on the brackets for the rear suspension. So you see the blue line there. You can clean that off like I did here on the right side to your liking. And so after I cleaned up the body, I gave it a light coat of primer, and then we're going to give it yet another coat after some sanding, and then once again we'll sand that. If necessary, you do another coat until it looks just right. I chose the clear windshield for the front glass here, and it installs from the inside. So use a little bit of white glue or clear part cement to put this in place. And I tacked it up there with a little bit of low adhesive painter's tape. Now you can reduce that adhesion if it's too sticky, just by tapping it on some cloth or something. But anyway, you don't want it too sticky, but you want the window to stay in place until it sets. I chose the orange pattern for the rear backlight, the rear window there, and go ahead and glue that again with some white glue or clear part cement. And white glue is nice because if you get some on the glass, you can just wipe it off. Also, you don't have to scrape the paint. It just kind of sticks to things with a light adhesion. So here are the parts you'll need for the interior, and go ahead and get those out and clean up the pieces that you see that are primed there, and then give them a good coat of primer. and get those staged. Remember, you got to scrape glue or paint or chrome plating from parts you want to stick together. Now the back portion of the floor and the seat were painted with some of that One Shot brand dark brown. It's code L115. And then the forward part is painted with some black. Now I shot the seat in the back portion there with some semi-gloss clear, and then the front portion with some flat coating so that it looks like carpet. Now scrape the paint and glue the parts to the floor. You can see the pedals there and the shifter in place as well. I had forgotten to check, but the bottom of the floor has some sinks and some pin marks. So I cleaned those up, and then I repainted the bottom of the floor after sanded them off with some flat black. We'll put the front tire together, so scrape the chrome off of the insides of the rims there so you can glue the two halves together. And once that's dried, you can just kind of ripple the tire onto the outside. It makes a pretty nice looking bike tire, and it's kind of a good fit. It'll hold with no glue. You just need to put it in place. And the spokes should be lined up so that all of the spokes are offset from each other on both sides. Get out the parts to put the front forks together. There's three main pieces there, and then scrape the chrome, and I use some tube glue for the two side pieces that are attached to the center to form a Springer type fork. And then the completed fork assembly with the front wheels and the tire installed are shown here, and the lower legs of the fork are gently spread apart, and then the front wheel slips into place onto the hubs. There's no need for glue, so it would rotate. Now this is why we left that front and lower portion of the frame unglued. We're going to spread that a little bit, and then we're going to slip the forks into place at this time into the collar. And then you can use a little tube glue at the top there to clamp the forks into position. And if you want them to turn, make sure you don't get any on the fork post there, and then clamp it together until it's set up and dry. Now we're going to deviate from the instructions a little bit. They call for the floor to be installed later, but by putting it in now, the paint in the body doesn't have to be scraped to install it later. So this means, less touch-up. Now the interior assembly then is glued into place after scraping paint from the edges of the floor and the glue points inside. Note there's a little black wash too that I placed on the springs on the front fork, and the tail light mount was installed before the paint. Now at this point you can add your decals to the body. They're pretty easy to install. They come off the film well, and they're not really prone to flipping over. So just choose the ones that you want. Of course, I used the Tex-Mex scheme here for, after all, it is a taco trike. And then after those are thoroughly dried, I noticed, the handlebars needed to be, the handle grips there on the handlebars, they needed to be touched up, so I painted those with a flat black. So grab the parts now for the engine. It's got more detail than we were expecting, I think. And nice chrome valve covers and oil pan. So go ahead and get those together. So the headers and the intake stacks will be installed after the engine gets installed in the frame. So I wouldn't put these parts on until it's there because then it won't fit between the frame rails. You'd have to pull the model apart again. Before you assemble the engine, make sure that you remember to scrape the paint and chrome off those pieces before adding, I used some tube glue in this case. And then you paint the block and the heads. I used the One Shot bright red for that. It's code L104. And the bell housing and the base of the magneto and the intake were painted aluminum. Now the magneto cap, I painted Tester's tan color, and transmission was steel. And note there's no starter included in this. So notice that the paint's been scraped where the headers will be mounted and where the intake stacks are
going to be mounted to the intake manifold because you can't really get at them later when it's in the frame. So there's also a pin on top of the transmission, you see back there, and this needs to have the paint removed because it glues that portion into the frame. We're going to take our powerhouse engine here and scrape the paint from the inside of the motor mounts and the inside slots on the block, and also that pin on top of the transmission. So to install the engine, slide the front end into the frame rails until the slots in the bike line up with the motor mounts. And then you've got some tube glue in hand. Use a little tube glue on those spots, and also put a little glue on that transmission pin, and it locates to a hole in the bottom of the floor as you push that down into position. So get these chrome plated lanterns out. There are the mounts for the headlights and the tail lights, and then we're going to assemble those after scraping the chrome off, the chrome under the paint and the paint, and use some tube glue to put them together. Now there's a choice of which colored lenses you'd like to use. I used the clear ones, and I painted them, the tail light ones, with some maroon paint, some stoplight type red, and I used some white glue to install the lenses. I painted the light housings with some liquid leaf classic gold to give them a brass look, as they look like they're antique, and antique lights were made out of brass. So the headlight mounts painted with the body color, and then we're going to add that to the fork. So scrape the paint and the chrome there, and use some tube glue for this, and then make sure that it dries into the proper orientation. Also, there's that the black wash. You can see it on the inside of the springs. Looks pretty nice. So we can insert that headlamp. You see it's got the clear lens, and then it's pointed in the right direction, and applied some tube glue to that. So keep adjusting that as it dries to make sure it stays in proper position. The rear differential is chrome plated and comes in two parts, so scrape the plating and glue that together. You can use just about any glue, tube or liquid, and let that set and dry. So scrape the plating off the ends there, and then kind of squeeze that into the rear leaves there, that suspension portion, and glue that into position. Also, there's a part that simultaneously is glued into the transmission. We can work on the rear tires and wheel assemblies now, so you're going to need to once again clean that up after you've painted it. Now the wheels have set up, and you can see here there's some red on the inside of the rear or inside rims, and then the hollow tires can easily be slipped onto those after you glue them together, and they look pretty good. The massive rear slicks get installed onto the metal axle, which is slipped in through the rear housing there, and it rolls pretty easily. So if it's on a shelf, make sure you know where you're going to leave it, that it doesn't come flying off. Otherwise, you can glue it into position. It'll stay there that way. I used some of the liquid leaf classic gold on the tail light mount, which complements the body, and I put that into position, and then after scraping paint where the lamp goes through, the tail light was installed there. Next we'll install the headers. Of course we'll need to scrape the glue off of the plate where the headers are glued to the motor, but you can also put a little black wash into the recesses there at the ends of the tubes to give it a little more realistic appearance. So add some glue to the mounting point there, and then put the headers in place. And I found that I put a stir stick underneath it that was just the right height. You could use probably a deck of cards to get the right height, so that you got something to support those headers in position until the glue sets up. So now we can put those intake stacks into position on top of the motor, and of course scrape the glue there, and you'll find that a pair of tweezers will help you get those, especially the back ones, into place. Well, this is all that I had left over from the kit. It's a single-purpose kit. The only thing left are the optional windows and a really nice set of decals for the old stash. Well, there you have it. This gorgeous looking little trike is a massive powerhouse of energy with that huge V8 in there. And it's not too hard to build. Just a little bit of attention to the painting really makes it stand out. It's quite different, and with the big M&H slicks there, it's imposing. Now, the forks and the tires are operational, so you can move those around if you like. And also, it's not that difficult to build, but not exactly recommended for the beginner either. So, a pair of tweezers and a lot of patience, and you can put this thing together really probably in a weekend. But if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you like this premium scale model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the icon in the lower right hand corner of all of our reviews. You could also find us on Facebook or our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.